anyway, yeah. I will leave you to think about that during my presentation because you've already seen it.
Figure a solution. We can figure something out.
Come on in. I know you guys are out there. I'm waiting for you. Come in and have a seat. Is that Marilyn? Oh my gosh, Marilyn. Hi. Here comes Jane for the third time. Okay.
Hello.
Two more.
Okay, good.
Look, these are women.
I know. You look very comfortable.
No, they're hot. I don't like to wear sneakers.
Really? Oh,
They're so uncomfortable.
I love sneakers, which is why this was like, this is my version of formal.
Welcome.
I'm like, look, I'm wearing suits. Thank you.
Have a seat.
These ones, the Greek.
Welcome to the
Yeah, these ones I picked up in Colombia.
Society.
They have
Comedy
amazing
chapter.
work there.
This is our first session of the year. Ready for the garden tour, actually. Oh, I'm going there. Excuse me while I get pinned. Okay. Our mission. Our mission is CPR. So just so you'll remember it. Conservation, preservation, and restoration. CPR, right? That's so easy to remember. Don't look at the slide. Don't worry about the slide, except after Saumya starts. What else was I going to tell them?
I think you're just going to talk about the meeting.
Oh, yeah. No, I'm not going to talk about them. So this first meeting, I already told them, this first meeting is to prep you for the garden tour. The next meeting, next month in October, we have 2 more sessions for you, and those are on invasives. How to pull them out, why to pull them out, and what to replace them with. I think that's the way that goes. And other than that, I'm going to hand you over to Jane Higgins, and Jane is our chair for the garden tour this year, as she has been, and she is also our treasurer in the chapter. So Jane, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all for bringing weather. Oh, sorry. And thank you for braving the weather tonight. So the bottom part of the slide that's kind of hard to read is that if you're new to Conradino, we do meet the second Monday of the month, right here, with very informative speakers, like the one tonight. So feel free to come on back to the meetings. There is a newsletter that you're welcome to sign up for. You don't have to be a paying member to get the newsletter. And it's on the website, lots of great information there. So real quick, talking about the landscape tour coming up. It is Saturday, October 26th from 9 to 4. We do have tickets out here for sale. If you buy them online on Eventbrite, they're $15. If you want a hard copy, it's going to be $20. So it's an extra $5 to get that printed copy, and that's less than it costs to print it. So we're happy if you want a printed copy, but you need to pay extra for that this year. Our premier sponsor is the Native Butterfly Flowers, Tim and Anna. So we also have all our other sponsors listed in the brochure, whether you're getting it online or whether you're buying it out there. And be sure and shop at our local sponsors because they're small businesses and not the big box stores. So we want to support our local small businesses. And as Linda mentioned, we've got 2 more information sessions coming up, October 13th, Sunday at 3 o'clock, and October 14th, our regular meeting time at 6 p.m. like this one. October 13th is going to be very special because Stacy Matrazo, who's the executive director of the Florida Wildflower Foundation, is presenting on the invasive species, and she's somewhat of a Florida celebrity speaker, so that's just like a really big thrill that she was available for us. She is however, not available for the Monday night on October 14th, so I'm going to be doing her presentation she shared with us. Okay, so just we want to make that clear, that don't come Monday night thinking Stacy can come. Those are also available on Eventbrite. And again, this is a list of our sponsor. You can't read it, I know. But basically, it's all the native nurseries that are so supportive of us and lots of other local small businesses. So again, you'll see a lot of these people on the back of the t-shirts that we'll be wearing and also in the brochure. Just please, please, anything you can do to help them out. So anything like that, we're okay? Everybody's excited about the tour? Okay, yes.
Do you want to talk about advertising flyers, people who live in HOAs?
Yes, that's a great point, a question about advertising in HOAs. If you know anybody in HOAs, the tour this year, 5 out of the 6 homes are in HOAs. So there's a definite emphasis this year on HOA homes because we've been hearing that a lot of people are having challenges, and that's why we have this great presenter talking about how she overcame some of those challenges. But yes, anything you can do to help us get the word out, we would really appreciate it. Right, there's some flyers out here, flyers online. Contact me if you need anything. Yeah.
Go to the libraries and see.
Right? We got posters all over the place, but not so much within HOAs because they won't let us come up there if we're not living there, right? So we have to find people who are living there. Did you have a question, ma'am?
I was going to ask, is tonight, are you covering the same thing you did last night, or do we miss?
Yes, it's the same presentation as yesterday.
Thank you.
Yep. But I'm glad you came back if you were here yesterday. Oh, okay. So tonight I would like to introduce one of the homeowners that is on the tour this year, and you are really going to want to go see her home because it's truly spectacular what she's done. Her name is Saumya, and she's a biomedical engineer who operates in 9 planting zones. She has a proven track record of killing her plants, which has only been mitigated by her and natives. Her dream garden is purple, requires no upkeep, and would allow her to have an elephant or some sheep. So today she is here to talk to you about her bewildering fascination with dirt. So please help me welcome Saumya up here. And no, you don't need that. Or do you need this?
Yes.
Okay.
We're good? All right. Can everyone hear me? Okay. I will warn you, I have a tendency to get very overly excited, in which case my voice will get even louder. So please feel free to tell me to shut up whenever you need me to just bring the voice down just a little bit. Thank you all so much for being here. I hope you are ready to talk about, well, dirt and dirt in an HOA specifically. So my name is Saumya Vanderwist, and I'd like to tell you a little bit about what and who I am and how I came about to be so interested in natives. I am an engineer. I like table of contents. I like organization. So you will see this slide multiple more times throughout the presentation, so I apologize ahead of time. As an engineer, I actually hate lawn. I also enjoy food plants, and I think that anything that supports fauna is even better than a food plant, which is, for me, that's saying quite a bit. And the best of all is to have something that is self-supporting or self-maintaining. So, I came about my hatred of lawn in a very honest method. I grew up mostly in Texas. And so thereby we have a growing condition that is optimal for growing pretty much anything. However, nobody wants to be outside. My husband, on the other hand, grew up in Minnesota, where they have a very short growing season, and yet everybody is outside all year round, which makes total sense as to why we ended up in Arizona for 9 years. But this is actually an image of a fully thriving, completely balanced biome in the desert. So there are more plants than what you can see here. There's more animals than what you can see here. And this, it looks completely bereft to those of us who are used to seeing lawn everywhere or used to seeing greenery that is green. So while I was in the desert, because there's a lot of scaping, which is when they have rock out instead of actually having mulch or various other materials, because they're trying to minimize your weeds and also help erosion down. I discovered that I could grow food plants in the desert, and I used a group called Native Seeds in order to help me understand how to grow food in the desert. They're a really great organization based primarily based in Tucson, Arizona, but they are on indigenous and heirloom plants that are adapted to drier environments in general. So drought, so how do you sustain yourself if you are surrounded by more drought-like conditions? So their plants originally were only geared towards the Southwest, and now they've expanded outwards to other growing zones. But I managed to grow my own squash in the middle of the desert. I was very proud of that. I also got some herbs, rosemary, and orange trees, which crazily enough do really, really well out there. And I found out that fauna-supporting plants are even better than my food plants. So I did this wrong yesterday. Okay, so on the left-hand side, on the right-hand side is the desert willow, which is an Arizona native. And what we did is we had removed all of the non-native plants and non-native trees. So even though they were a little bit older, we realized that we wanted something that was better for the environment as a whole. And then we kept our orange tree. And somehow or another, we ended up with so many birds, and nonstop we would have bird song. We had never seen these birds before when we had the non-native in there. And all we did is replace a couple of trees. It was pretty impressive. We also learned a little bit more about, or I learned more about self-supporting and self-maintaining plants. So these are all examples of plants that provide shade. So this is the same image. This is an example of a plant that provides mulch for the ones that are underneath it. These ones actually provide shelter, and these are all food sources. So that is within one self-contained area, and it also means that I don't actually have to maintain anything in order to keep that circle of life going, right? I don't have to do anything except go out there and pick what I want to eat and leave the rest of it for the insects and for the animals. But I'm also a biologist. As a biologist, I think that chaos and the chaos that's associated with living organisms is truly amazing. I also believe that things grow and then they die. And last of all, I learned, especially here in Florida, that non-soil or non-plant components, such as soil and watershed health, are as important, if not more important, than the plants themselves that you get to grow. This is the chaos of living organisms. So the image up here is actually my dog as a puppy, face planting on top of an Elliot's love grass that was outside her front door. She did this every day, multiple times a day, for 2 years straight. That Elliot's love grass still managed to bloom and to reseed itself, to remain green and gorgeous, the whole thing. The other image is one of a honeybee visiting a giant ironwood flower, and that's also chaos, right? It's not exactly controlled and something that is regulated. It's chaotic, gorgeous. Well, and this is the other part of chaos, the part that kind of sucks a little more. So these are plantings that we did with minimal irrigation, of course a little bit to help the plants settle in and grow at the start, but planted all of these at the same time. That one failed, that one failed, that one failed, that one failed too. And these two succeeded, and we have no idea why. They're the same exact plant. There's a slight difference in location, but we have no idea why certain plants live and certain plants die, and all we can do is just do our best, right, with what we've got. This is the soil biology and the watershed health. So the video that's up there is actually of a worm composting system that we have at our location. It's called a sub pod, and I have earthworms in there, and those earthworms will break down any of the food scraps that I give them, and then proceed to not only distribute the microbes all throughout the soil that's surrounding my composting system, but they will also aerate the soil. And all I do is give them my food scraps. That's pretty cool. Now, the other image is actually a picture of what we see very commonly here, and I see every day as I drive into my subdivision. We have a really pretty preserve area in our subdivision. It's quite glorious, and as you can see in the background, there are some beautiful native trees, there's native shrubs, we get a lot of wildlife, you see the water in front of it, we get the herons and the egrets. It's gorgeous. The thing that sucks is that green thing in front, right? That is lawn that is mowed, that is fertilized, it's sprayed with herbicide. It's maintained in such a way that all it does is causes more trouble for water and for the animals that might be depending on it. So, not my favorite. Well, this is actually our messy starting point. So, we actually were a new build. We built our house, and in the process discovered some massive problems with our, not necessarily our house, but with our landscape. The first of it is that we had fill dirt underneath our property. The second problem we had was that it was misgraded plot. And the third problem was that our builder required a St. Augustine only sodded lawn. So delicious. All of this caused massive amounts of flooding, standing water all over our property and all over our neighborhood. It was really quite terrible. Now, I told you that they required Augustine only sodded lawn. I actually requested that they not put anything down, or that we could put down ground covers of our choices versus the St. Augustine. Builder did not allow that because in the contract it said a certain amount of our landscaping money would automatically go towards St. Augustine. Also, irrigation to do that, to keep that St. Augustine lawn pristine as could be. Well, we ended up also finding out that new builds, a lot of new builds in Florida, or at least here in Brevard County, don't come with gutters. That was a little surprising for us because with the sheer amount of water that's coming down and all of it coming off of up, like I said, with the standing water, with the flooding, but that also means that water is coming down close to our foundation and causing more erosion. We didn't want that, so instead we put whatever little money we had left into putting rock all the way around our property just to protect it and reduce the amount of erosion that we found. So early 2019, which is about a year and a half after we moved in, our status that we have way too much lawn, we have rock burnt plants because it's too hard for them to grow in that area, and so much flooding from all the wash off. It was so bad because we have a slope behind our house. It was so bad that we were flooding the neighbors that were behind us. So I started to do some research as soon as we bought the house, but started to really do some research when I realized how many problems we were dealing with. So the first part of that research was we started with literature. And I found Doug Talamy, who is an absolutely amazing researcher. He's an entomologist who specialized in or specializes in understanding how closely related our fauna and flora actually are if we do not have any native plants anywhere. And then he also shows in a lot of his papers and in his publications what happens if you just replace a few of your non-native plants with the natives. And then he shows the relative increase in your insect population and in your animal population. And then he shows what happens if you go as close to fully native as you possibly can. It's really powerful stuff. I recommend everybody take a look at it. The other literature that I really read up quite a bit about was published primarily by Marjorie Shropshire and Ginny Stibbold. Now, their work was really valuable to me because it taught me a little bit more about the concept of tiered planting and how to maintain a multi-tiered system. So something that would give you an anchor, for example, in this case, they used a magnolia, but would also involve shrubbery, which is your second tier, and also involve ground cover, which would be your third tier. And you can have in-betweeny tiers all the way through. I found that these are really beautiful images, and the majority of them are bird's eye view, so you get a chance to see exactly how it would look like when your magnolia is full and blossoming, and how it would look like if viburnum is full, like how much space it would take in your yard. It was really great for me because I'd never really thought of planting on those levels. And so we also went to a couple of places. One of the places that I haunted pretty regularly was Rock Gardens. And remember, I'm a transplant, so I didn't know anything about what grows in Florida and what the Florida growing conditions might even look like in terms of when does the water come, when is it too dry, do we have clay, do we have sand. So Rockledge was really useful because it allowed me to get some general knowledge. Also, I have food plants because I like to eat. I have a lot of food plants on our property, and so it allowed me to figure out which of the food plants made the most sense for the size of our property and also the conditions that we have. We don't have a giant property, so I had to curtail some of my choices. The other place that we went to quite frequently was a native plant nursery, and I would recommend that everybody who is interested in natives try to check at least one nursery, but go there a couple of different times during even a month, or even better, over multiple months. The reason is, one of the complaints that a number of people hear about native plantings is that native plants are really scrubby. Right? They're too bare and they just look like sticks poking out of the ground. Why do we want that? Well, the problem is they look scrubby unless you choose them properly for the environment that you're putting them in. They look scrubby maybe when it's just one plant, but when you put, say, 3 together, all of a sudden it looks like a mass of beautiful flowers everywhere. Balance, and every single plant has its own type of balance. So I haunted the native plant nurseries also because I wanted to see what does it look like when I have 10 of this particular plant. What does it look like when I have 1? I was able to pick things that made the most sense for me. Also, I'll point this out in case you'll find out soon enough. I am a very lazy gardener. I want something that is minimal maintenance, or preferably no maintenance. I yet found a single plant that would allow me to be no maintenance, but I'm trying. I'm continually trying for it. So this is what I thought would be totally normal to plant all in one place and all at the same time. I have a very weird mind. Crazy is an adjective that you can use quite appropriately. And so when I was looking for trying to actually determine what are we going to put in the ground, I went to a landscape designer. In our case, we used Change Greenery as our contractors. And they actually were people that understood my approach, which is, randomness pretty much. And they were able to synthesize ideas with me to tell me that, hey, try not to put every single color in the rainbow in one spot. Maybe distribute them along a meadow in the front of your yard so it doesn't look like you made a mess. They also were very accepting of my approach, which is I wanted a multi-tiered, multi-year system. The reason is one of the things I picked up from Rockledge Gardens and also the native plant nurseries is that Florida growing means that everything grows, sort of. So I wanted to be able to understand what the plants were doing before I went ahead and yanked out and put in new ones. Wanted to give them a little time, try and see if we're doing what they were supposed to do. And also the other reason why we needed a multi-year timeline is, quite honestly, I didn't have the budget to put everything I wanted at one time. I needed to build it up slowly. And the last thing I really enjoyed and appreciated is I wanted to work with a contractor who's dedicated to maintaining my soil biome and so to keeping our watersheds as clean as possible. So, how do you make nice with your neighbors? Otherwise known as what happens if you're the first property in your HOA to go fully native. So one thing is, please know your legal hammers. I'm going to talk about this a little bit more. By the way, some of these slides are on your handout, so please don't worry about trying to copy everything down. But I'll talk about the legal hammers in just a second. But if you're putting a proposal in, let's say you are in an HOA. By the way, how many of you are in an HOA? Okay, awesome. Those of you who are within an HOA, let me ask you this question. How many of you have put in landscaping proposals with native plants?
Well, I didn't use a proposal, I just did it and said, they're all natives.
Okay. that also, putting it in and just saying that they're all natives, that sometimes work, but it's a handful of people that have tried to put their landscaping proposals in. So one thing I learned is, in addition to knowing your legal hammer, also want as much documentation as possible when you put in your proposals. I've put in 7 proposals now over the space of time since we started in 2019. And I found that the best way to go through the mass of bureaucracy that's known as our HOA is to make sure that I gave descriptions of the plants that I was going to put in, or gave links to wonderful websites such as the Florida Native Plant Society website, in which they could find information about that particular plant. I also tried to we actually made sure that we needed to, we resurveyed our property specifically so that I could give better information in those proposals. It made it easier for my HOA, for the bureaucracy to understand what we were doing. So also, the other thing, please leave adequate time for the bureaucracy to happen. It takes a certain amount of time for people to read them over, to think about them, to discuss them. It can be not exactly making nice with your neighbor if you throw the proposal in their face and tell them that you're going to be doing it in 3 days, whether or not they like it. Give them a little space if you can. If you also attend your HOA meetings and talk about your natives, which is something I'll also be talking about in a later slide. And then as a neighbor, please try and keep your landscaping neat and bordered in the front yard, or from whatever can be seen from the street, because that is something that a lot of people have issues with native yards, is they can tend to be very either overgrown or they look messy. And the fact of the matter is, it's going to be a bit of a mess, right? Biology is messy. It's gorgeous, it's also messy. So I managed to get around that by making sure that while it might be a little chaotic, it's got a very pretty border and it's very clearly defined that this is the nice little bed. And so, another thing about this is it allowed me to, I can't control who sprays what within my neighborhood, right? I can't tell them, I can suggest that they stop using fertilizer. and suggest that they stop insecticides and herbicides, I can't require them to do so. So having my beds bordered meant that, first of all, my neighbors could see, immediate neighbors could see all of the beautiful insect life or the wildlife that was coming to my property. And second of all, it also meant that I had very clearly defined areas of, hey, your spraying stops here, right? I can't stop you spraying, but stop it on my property line. So, and then the last thing I did is I offered a lot of free seedlings around to everybody in my neighborhood. If anybody is willing to stop and take a look at my plant, I am willing to run after you with a plant in a pot. HOA regulations. This is really important. Read everything. It is extremely tiresome to do so, but please read everything that you see. And the reason is a lot of the covenants, which are sometimes known as CCRs, depending on your HOA, those are convoluted, and also they seem to be at cross purposes. So read it and then go ask questions of your board members, of subcommittee members if you need them. Ask questions of people who represent your neighborhood within the HOA. And don't ask them questions about what to plant, right? Ask them about how to present the native landscaping so it makes more sense within your HOA. Do they want the borders to look like a certain thing? Are they okay if you put pine bark mulch in the front, or would they prefer something like pine needles? I mean, that seems like a very small thing to most of us because we just say, hey, it's organic, done, keep on moving. But for people who want to see a particular look in their neighborhood, it helps if you ask what it is that they want to be looking at, and then gear your choices of plants towards something that makes more sense. Okay. Policy, do not even worry about trying to read this one. You can read it on your, I think it's one of the pages of your handouts. If not, all of the links to this information are available on the handout itself. I think that's the top of the second page. But essentially, Florida-friendly landscaping, the statute that is there with respect to all of the state of Florida, does not say anything about native plants. It only requires that planting be Florida-friendly in order for HOA, that HOAs are not supposed to stop you from having Florida-friendly plants, okay? So what we are trying to suggest is that native plants, which are thereby Florida-friendly, are better and can do the same thing. But realize that your legal statute does not in any way say anything about plantings. Also, the other two places for you to look at to understand policy and policy that's coming into play, so legislative policy that might be coming down the pipeline, is of course the Florida Native Plant Society and also the St. John's River Water Management District. And those links will also, I should also point out, the presentation or a portion of the presentation will be made available on the Conradina chapter website. So feel free to, you just be able to link through from the presentation at a later point in time. But the St. John's River Water Management District, remember that they are actually linked not to you as a homeowner, but instead to the HOA, right? So they oversee the HOA oversees you. So you can call St. John's and ask them questions, but they don't actually directly oversee homeowners specifically. Okay, this is a white paper, which is essentially just it's a tiny little research paper that I created for my HOA in order to suggest that they could use native plantings in different locations throughout the neighborhood. These are common areas, so ones that are not owned by any single one homeowner, but that the HOA still has to oversee. And all it is just a small description of the various plants. I actually grabbed most of the images and descriptions from the Native Plant Society website. And all I did is I put a couple of them together and was able to deliver it to my HOA and just explain to them, hey, this is why natives are important. I can help you reduce your maintenance costs, reduce your irrigation, reduce your fertilizer, and oh, by the way, they might actually look beautiful. So, what actually happened when we started doing stuff to our property? Our major goals when we started actually putting things on our property were to improve drainage, support the soil ecosystem, and to allow for companion planting. Now, the companion planting is not something that everybody will need. Because I had food plants that I wanted to have, mostly food trees, mango, figs, so on and so forth. I wanted to make sure that I was planting natives nearby that would be able to help support the requirements of food plants. So specifically things that are nitrogen fixers, or things that provide a lot of green mulch and green manure that I could then heap around my plant and help it to grow. Because I didn't want to be draining the soil of what few nutrients might exist just because I wanted a pretty mango. Sorry, delicious mango. So this is our very first proposal that we put in. So this is in 2019. We actually, one of the images is, the image on your left is going to be a bird's eye view of our property. And the image on the right is actually a photoshopped image to show what it might look like if we put those plantings in the front yard, which is the street view. This one actually failed. So we moved on to the resubmission. Now the interesting thing is the only reason that proposal failed was because that little strip of yard or grass that's between your sidewalk and your street is officially owned by the HOA, even though it's maintained by us as homeowners. I didn't know that because I thought I had read my CCRs properly and I had missed that point. So I redid the submission by simply shoving the plants onto the other side of the sidewalk and woof, we go. This one was accepted. Now, one thing you'll notice is that this image is a black and white image primarily, and the reason is our HOA is a younger HOA, and also it's a somewhat smaller community. So a lot of our paperwork is scanned in and then destroyed. Sometimes color imagery might not necessarily show up in a scanned document as well as black and white. Since I knew that this is how record keeping was done within the community, I provided them with a black and white just so nobody could come later and tell me that I didn't give them the right information and maybe that pinkish blob was actually to be a bluish blob. So because our proposal was accepted, we started with our first mess. And I will tell you, we made lots of messes in our landscaping. So our first mess, which was an awesome one, is we ripped out, I would say, over half of the lawn, almost 2/3 of the lawn that we had in our backyard. All that sod that they had put down, we yanked it all up. And the reason was that area is, like I mentioned before, is on a slope. That sod, with its very shallow roots, was not able to capture and move or keep any of that water. Instead, it was just sheeting down like a slip and slide. So I wanted to put in things that would be able to suck that water down, and I wanted to put in, most importantly, drainage and mulch. Lots and lots of mulch. We put in, especially this first dump, we put in and have maintained since then almost 3.5 inches of pine bark on that slope. Because of that, our neighbor in our backyard never once seen the least bit of flooding. Okay, because that pine bark mulch captures all the water, sucks it down, keeps it available for my plants, which means I get to irrigate even less. Lazy gardener. And these are actually the results of that first mess that we made. And the results are we were able to use natives to improve the drainage. On the left-hand side, you can see we're minimizing the standing water that's coming from our AC unit by putting natives in that surrounding area. In the middle, we were able to break up compacted soil, which is all that, oh, so wonderful filter that they had given us, and provide tons of plants for pollination. And on the far edge shows you exactly how much mulch we laid down. It's pretty giant. And this is some of the gorgeous stuff we saw. Now, mind you, this is in 2020. This is less than a year we put in all of these plants. I think this image, if I'm correct, is about 6.5 months there. We already had goldenrods blooming, and on those we got to see some native sweat bees, which have this gorgeous green iridescent. We also had wild coffee berries. We had a visiting gopher tortoise for the first time, which was very, very cool. We removed a bunch of invasives, so we back up to protected, well, it's supposed to be protected piece of property that is owned by another neighborhood, but there were invasives that were coming up into our property, so I was able to take back and remove quite a few of those. And then in their place, we actually put down a bunch of native screening plants, essentially shrubbery that just happens to be a native planting at the same time. And the last picture that's in the bottom side is our new beds filling up with their plants. So we decided to make another mess. This mess, it has a little bit of a different focus. So one of the things that was very important to me was to make sure that I provided a very accessible garden and yard space in general. And so we actually put in a sidewalk and patio expansion, specifically to allow a more ADA compliant lifestyle for anybody that was either visiting or who was living in that house. So we did so there's stairs going down that slope I was telling you. We just decided to go ahead and put in staircases so that people could get down safely. We also put in a screened porch, and underneath that we put in a raised bed that was all ADA compliant. And these are the results of it. So we have, our sidewalks are 4 foot wide, which is more than what's needed in order for somebody who's in a motorized wheelchair to be able to go down safely into our yard and to traverse around. Our staircases were designed so that they're very large and very shallow. So you can drop a walker in front of you, lock it in place, and because it's a very shallow step, you don't have to fall down or have too much impact on your step down as you go down to the next step, and then you move your walker to the next step after that. We also had a raised bed. Now this one's kind of cool. It's an H shape, and the H shape is because that way you can reach every part of it if you have mobility issues. And it was 3 feet high so that you'd have to bend over to do your gardening. And I left it open in the bottom. So we built up all the soil that's within that. So it took a lot of board and a lot of plant material from our backyard, but slowly but surely I've managed to build up all 3 feet of that soil within our raised bed. And so we made another mess. This is actually not our fault. It's only because we wanted a pet. So we got a dog, and this mess was we needed a fence to be able to keep a pet on our property safely. Now, one thing is a lot of plantings that we had put in at the very beginning, they had grown, and a number of them had grown very excessively and very happily, which was a huge surprise to me. I figured I would kill most of them. But because of that, would need to update those plantings that were either too successful or they weren't as useful as we had hoped they would be. We also needed to remove any pet hostile plantings and keep the animal inside, but still allow the native animals who wanted to come visit, to allow them as much access as possible. So one thing is, for example, under our fence, we have giant holes all over our property. Those holes were dug out by bunnies, by gopher tortoises, by, I'm not entirely sure what, but they made holes for the property. And because of that, we've never filled in those holes because we wanted to make sure any animal that came onto our property knew that it could safely leave. We also trained our dog to, first of all, not go under or dig into any of those holes. And second of all, to also alert us if they saw a thing that came onto their property. So our dog is trained that it sees a gopher tortoise. It barks like crazy to let us know that there is something here and we need to take care of this right now. We go outside and our dog races past us to come in the house. Reason is, we trained her to understand that she would get a vast amount of treats if she alerted us and then came in the house. So that's what she does. Doesn't matter what it is, gopher tortoise, the bunnies, the hawks that come in the yard, she gets her food. And these are some of the results that we got from this third mess. Now, I love it. And like I said, chaos is my happy place. Okay, so just to run them down. So I'm gonna start in the upper left-hand side. That is seaside gentian that you're looking at. Right beside it is coral honeysuckle, so top middle. It's coral honeysuckle growing in a pot. And we have it vining up and kind of spilling over that beautiful pot. On the top right-hand side is a fakahachi grass, is flanking scorpion tail and native lantana. Incidentally, we recently discovered that there was a duck nesting under our fakahachi grass that's under our front yard. And then the bottom right-hand side is a meadow that we built. So our front bed is actually meadow style. We have a few grasses anchoring it all the way through, and then we let the wildflowers come and go as they please, essentially seasonally, right? And we allow them to reseed within that meadow. In the bottom middle, we have a rosinweed, and the pretty purple thing is a Stokes aster. Now, this is what happened inside of our property. We had the AC bed I told you about that had that extra water from our air conditioning units, right? We put wax myrtles that grew so prolific. Woo! I think I just lost a microphone. You guys hear me? No? Hello? Hello? I lost a micro. Oh, there we go. I'm back. All right. So the wax myrtle grew so prolifically that it actually topped our gutters within 4 months, us planting them. Right? Now, we also put in some muley grass and rattlesnake master because we had a lot of, like I mentioned, we have a lot of water because of that air conditioning unit. Those plants suck it up beautifully and keep it from fading. Figure 32 is scarlet sage. We have some more love grass growing along the side and false rosemary that we have spill over between the house and our sidewalk that we put in. And in the bottom figure, which is figure 33, is one of my favorite images. And the reason is that is almost the same viewpoint of the same area, and it merely happens to be about a month and a half apart. And it looks totally different. One image is an image of all the partridge peas, the bushes, which reseeded. We only planted one plant and it reseeded itself prolifically. We ended up with this hedge that wrapped around the edge of our sidewalk, thick and glorious, and with honeybees and carpenter bees falling out of the blossoms because they were so drunk on pollen. A mere month and a half later, those partridge peas had died out, and we had the black-eyed Susans that had come up in their, and actually the black-eyed Susans had been growing up underneath the partridge peas. You just didn't see them all that time. The beauty is I didn't do much in order to be able to use the seasonality of these wildflowers. All I do is just pluck out ones that are growing a little crazy, and that's about it. The rest of it is just what these plants do naturally. And it's amazing that I got completely different front yard just because the seasons change. So these are more messes, or this is the result of the messes, sorry, in the rear. So that video that's playing right now is actually our resident gopher tortoise who has now moved in. And I am sitting less than 6 inches away from him snapping his way through our backyard, munching on random yumminesses that he found. Now, one thing you hear is you hear a crunching. And the reason is because we put down so much mulch, I prefer more of a letting the leaves drop instead of necessarily having to blow them up or bag them or anything else. I just leave them where they're at. It also lets the gopher tortoise make really funny sounds as he's walking around. But I have, around our staircases, we now have wild petunia and frog fruit interlacing within the bars and going all the way down our staircases. I only planted a few frog fruit, and I didn't plant any wild petunia. Those are volunteers. The magnolia I did plant, and is slowly growing, a native magnolia with scarlet sage underneath it. And then the one that from the right is another native plant, or I should say a small, tiny little native grass. I forgot what it is, so if anybody else remembers what it is, please feel free to tell me, because all I remember is I took a picture of it because it was so beautiful and sculptural, and it's just this tiny little plant. It was pointed out to me that it was a native, and then I promptly forgot, because I forgot to write it down. Spiderwort with its beautiful 3-petaled flowers, and underneath is sunshine mimosa growing quite thickly. So those are the previous messes. So what are my current messes? Well, we decided to make a giant mess of things, but yes, we made a pretty giant mess. I will just be totally honest about that. It's really cool, and I love it. But one of the other things that we do currently is I actually started composting pretty regularly. Remember what I was telling you about soil health? Part of maintaining your soil biome is if you can compost, which all those food scraps otherwise go to a landfill, it just makes things even better. And for us, what made the most sense is a process of an anaerobic bokashi system, which is the urban composter. And now urban composter, you put your scraps in, and you can put any type of scraps, cooked, uncooked, fats, anything that has oils or spices, things like garlic and onion, which normally you shouldn't really put much of in your compost, and even small bones can go into this particular system. And then you do a very difficult thing, you spray, and then you close the lid, and then you open it and you put more scraps, and you spray it. Sometimes you shove it down a little bit, but that's essentially the extent of the composting that I actually had to do. All I had to shove it down and spray it. The cool part about it, it's an anaerobic system. So instead of breaking it down into what we commonly think of, which is aerobic systems that have a tendency to be really, they can kind of smell, and it smells like things are rotting, and it can be somewhat unpleasant. This anaerobic system actually smells a little like sauerkraut. You open it up, and you get a little whiff of something that's fermenting, because that's actually what the anaerobic bokashi system gives you. Is essentially you're fermenting your scraps. Now, you can take them and dig a hole in the yard, and you can dump them all in there and cover it up, and then in about, I'd say about a month and a half, maybe up to 2 months, you could have beautiful compost. Problem is, it's already in a hole. It's a little difficult to figure out what it is that you put in versus what was already there. I wanted to do something, and actually, I'm weird. I really wanted worms. Don't ask me why. So I found a way to do worm composting. And the choice that I made is a system called a sub pod. And the reason is this pod actually is put in the ground itself. You flip it open, you dump your scraps in, you cover it up, you put a little bit of water, you close it, and you walk away. And that's all you do. And the system is actually set up to allow for airflow. So it also minimizes fruit flies and stuff like that. Then there's also holes on the side where various insects, including your composting worms or earthworms, can come in, chew up all your scraps, and they can go out into the soil and explore things. Really neat thing about the sub pod is it allowed me to do things like take vacations and not pay attention watering my worms, which are two things that apparently people do regularly. Is if you have worms, you quite often have to do a lot of temperature regulation for them, either by spraying them down or putting them inside and putting them in the shade, in the sun, blah, blah. Because I stuck it in the ground, if the worms were too hot, they went deeper into the ground. If they were too cold, they came up. I had to do nothing. Also with moisture, the same thing happens, right? If the ground is too wet, they just go, it's dry. And then they come back to whatever location is, I've got my food, and then they go away to wherever it's dry. I don't have to worry about keeping them just right. So this is the giant mess I made. Oh, there is a question. Yes. So the question was whether I use both composting systems. It is yes, actually. And the reason is the anaerobic system does an initial breakdown. Essentially what you're doing is you're spraying it with helpful bacteria, so essentially probiotics, the same ones that we use to maintain our gut health. They have put them in a nice spray bottle and you spray it. So I can take those scraps and actually put them in my earthworm system, and my earthworms are very happy to chomp it up the rest of the way. And because it's an anaerobic system and they are partially fermented, the bones, the onions and garlic, the spices and oils that normally are a giant no-no for worms, they're absolutely no trouble whatsoever because they've already been partially broken down and become more bioavailable. So that's a great question.
What's the stuff you spray in? What is that stuff?
So the question is what the stuff is I spray. Now that is actually part of the system. When you buy the urban composter, you can actually buy the spray bottle. It's, like I said, it's probiotics. You don't have to have it. It just helps things break down even faster and more efficiently. If you go without it, you will still have an anaerobic system. You might not have it it's not just break down. The anaerobic system might get overwhelmed with the fungus that we don't really want versus the fungi that we do want. So by having bacteria that are ones that we do want, the ones that smell nice for fermentation, we don't have the ones that come along, the bacteria that come along with rotting. So.
Where would you go buy that? I mean, I have plenty of buckets. I don't need a bucket.
Okay, so where do you buy the actual spray? Yes, so there is a link, and I will give that to you. And actually, it's on the back of your handout. I have all the vendors, and you can just go online and buy them there. I think they might even be available on Amazon, but I'm not entirely sure. I haven't checked in a while. The name is Urban Composter.
Oh, urban compost.
Yes. So the biggest mess that we've made most recently is we put in a rainwater capture system, and it's really, really cool. So instead of having a giant piece of plastic sitting in my yard to capture the rainwater, because quite honestly, like I said, we have a smaller piece of property. We don't have that many places to put those kinds of storage devices without it being easily seen from every part of our yard, right? So I wanted something that was a little more subtle, and I did not want to have to put in the equivalent of a septic tank that would then have to be cleaned out and maintained and require chemicals in order to keep it blah, blah. I wanted something that was idiot-proof. This is the idiot, by the way, in case you're curious. Yes, there's a question.
Did you have to submit bids to the HOA for all these subsequent improvements or changes in gardens?
Okay, so the question is whether I had to submit plans for each of the subsequent changes that we made to the garden. And the answer is yes, we did submit plans. So even now, I try and stay on top of it. A large part of it now is just like, do whatever you want, you're fine. But I still make sure that that paperwork is there. And the reason is, if anybody else buys this property, right? Let's say we have to leave the state or we're passing it along to somebody. I want to make sure that the documentation exists and exists in a way that anybody can access it. So one of the nice things of putting in this landscaping design or these proposals, that reminds me what I was trying to do each time, right? So if somebody else is coming into our property and says, oh, this magnolia looks terrible, they can go back and see when we planted the magnolia, and they can also read a little description as to why the magnolia was important to our backyard, which is what I've tried to include on our proposals. But yep. So this rainwater capture system, we used what's called Aquascape, which is the company that, or the product line that we were using. And it was actually put in for us by Florida Custom Aquatics. And the Aquascape products were designed in such a way that you have a really nice pond liner underneath your whatever it is, whether it's dirt, whether it's permeable pavers, whether it's a stream or fountain, like rocks or something, whatever it happens to be, that pond liner captures and holds water in it. It has a pump at the bottom of it, and then it can then recycle and use it to run a fountain. I found that to be really cool. So we ahead and put one in. So Florida Custom Aquatics installed for us a 240-gallon pondless waterfall system. We have no standing water through this particular waterfall system. It means that we have no standing water, so there are no mosquito pump for the waterfall, and we have a secondary pump that we use in order to run a spigot. And that spigot allows me to irrigate using those 240 gallons that I've captured anywhere in my yard. I just pull straight from it. All of it is on a gorgeous switch. I just flip my switch and now my spigot works. Turn it off, I'm done. It's really, really amazing. Now, we actually worked with Change of Greenery and they actually worked with Florida Custom Aquatics in order to plant and design all the native plantings that we have around it. So just a quick rundown of the image. We have a stream that's coming down in the front. It's about 2.5 feet or so at its highest point, and it has 4 different pools as it comes down, so little drops where you can hear the water rushing. Behind the stream is actually an established beauty berry that we already had. Behind that is an established coconut plant, and there's nearby. You remember I told you that I wanted to minimize my irrigation if our irrigation happens to run off a well system, but I still don't want to use it. I can use my waterfall to actually water that require a lot of water. I can use, was supposed to be. I can use my waterfall water to water the plants higher amounts of water that otherwise would be coming from my irrigation. I just now use my waterfall. It's really pretty cool. So around the stream, I've got creeping sage, Elliott's lovegrass, Leavenworth's tick seed. I've got stoke aster, rayless sunflower, And over to the sides, I have yellow top. I mean, I've got stuff all over the place. And the best part about it is there's frog fruit that's lacing around all of it. And it's going to continue to expand. It's going to get even prettier as time goes on. There is a question. Yes?
Do you have to like drain it if there's going to be like a lot of rain? In other words, like do you kind of prepare for that because is there any overflowing too much, I guess?
Okay, so the question is whether there was a threat of overflowing, and if so, what do I do to handle the overflow or to prepare for the fact that we might have a hurricane, for example, that would dump vast amounts of water? The answer is actually no. I don't have to do anything. And the reason is where we put it in, first of all, the water that comes into the waterfall is linked water, right? But we put from the waterfall itself, there is a rain garden set up that I made that actually directs all of the overflow from the waterfall. So it doesn't matter if I have more than 240 gallons that come down. It all just goes very nicely down my channel. Once again, I don't have to do anything. And you also asked to just maintenance for this particular piece. I have to do a very difficult thing, which is every 3 years, I have to shove essentially a wet vac to the bottom of it, yank some silt for about 10 minutes, and then go. That's about it. This system is maintained, the way it's designed is purely to be able to be as maintenance light as possible. There are no chemicals in this system at all, absolutely nothing. It is safe enough that my pet can drink from it, the wildlife can drink from it. Even I could, if I really was thirsty, I would get there, but haven't yet. But it's to me, that's been a really powerful thing, is that just there's so little maintenance required. Okay, so the real big question is, what are the costs? Now, before I show you the slide, I will warn you, due to our choices and also certain things that are outside of our control, we had to have everything professionally installed. We did not do any of it ourselves. Because of that, the cost is quite a bit higher, as you can imagine. If you were to do the same thing and then do it yourself, I'm guessing that you could bring down the put in cuttings and seeds and so on and so forth. So, now, these are all the references. They're on your handout. You don't pay any attention to me from now onwards. So, first one is just literature. These are the websites where you can get information on the with respect to the